Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Pesachim, 1 week at a time. Today is our 15th lesson of Masechet Pesachim. And those of you who have been learning every single day, today is actually our 100th day of Masechet Pesachim. That is, of course, because today is Daf 101 and the Masechet starts on Daf 2. So today is 100 days of Masechet Pesachim. So congratulations, everyone who has been learning, and really kol hakavod. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Okay, great. Excellent. So today we're going to do Daf 95 through 101. And for anybody who is joining just for the last perek, hang in there. It's going to be it's going to be a little while till we get to the next perek. But we're at Daf 95, and we are going to be concluding the 9th chapter together. So hang in there if you're joining just for the 10th perek. We will be there in a couple of minutes. But let's start with Daf 95. Now, this 9th chapter is going to compare Pesach Rishon, meaning the Pesach that we are familiar with, that happens on the 14th and 15th of Nisan, and Pesach Sheni. To remind ourselves, Pesach Sheni happens a month later in Iyar, that is 30 days after Nisan, on the 14th and 15th of Iyar. And that is going to be a second chance. We discussed it a little bit more last week. Is it just a do-over? Is it its own holiday in and of itself? Today we're going to compare the two Pesachim, right? The two Passovers. The original one that happens in Nisan and the second one that happens in Iyar. And we're going to try to understand what are the distinctions, what are the differences, and what are the similarities. So Daf 95, we have a Mishnah that says that the difference between regular Pesach, Pesach Rishon, and Pesach Sheni, right? What are those differences? So Pesach Rishon, again, when I say Rishon, I mean the one that we're familiar with in Nisan. You cannot have chametz in your house when you're eating the Corban Pesach. That is not true for Pesach Sheni. So remember, anybody who was tameh, who was impure, and couldn't go to the temple on the 14th and 15th of Nisan, when they wait another month, they do not need to clean their house for Pesach. They do not need to get rid of their chametz, but they do need to eat their Korban Pesach. Number two, Hallel needs to be recited when eating the original Korban Pesach on Pesach Rishon, but not for Pesach Sheni. However, the Mishnah does say that we need Hallel to be sung in the temple when the sacrifice is being brought. In the temple itself, Hallel is recited for Pesach Rishon and for Pesach Sheni. Both sacrifices are eaten roasted with matzah and maror. And this is why, just so you should know, some people have a custom that on the 14th or 15th of Iyar, they eat matzah, right? To signify the fact, actually it's on the 15th of Iyar, you people eat matzah to signify or to commemorate Pesach Sheni. And the last thing that the Mishnah says is that both Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni are what's called doche Shabbat, meaning if it falls out on Shabbat, you could still bring the sacrifice, and even though it is Shabbat. So now the Gemara discusses the differences between the two Passovers. So for Pesach Sheni, anything, the Gemara says, anything that has to do with the actual sacrifice, meaning the animal itself, or related to the animal itself is going to be consistent with Pesach Rishon. Anything that's not related to the actual sacrifice, as we mentioned, chametz, right, eating leavened food, that is not a problem. You can literally have a sandwich with bread and then go to the temple and bring your Corban, your sacrifice of Pesach Sheni. The Gemara continues and says that Pesach Sheni cannot be slaughtered for only one person. Remember, we've been talking about groups of people that register for the sacrifice. The Gemara says that for Pesach Sheni as well, you need a group of people. It cannot just be one person. And as we mentioned, it has to be roasted, but you do not have to get rid of your chametz. Another law for Pesach Sheni as well, you cannot break its bones. As we said for Pesach Rishon, it needs to be completely roasted. And again, as we mentioned, Hallel needs to be recited. The Psalms that are recited in Hallel as praise for God are said during the day when the sacrifice is brought, but not at night when the sacrifice is being eaten. The same thing, you need to, for Pesach Rishon, you need to sleep over in Jerusalem for Passover, but for Pesach Sheni, you do not need to do that. Okay, our next Mishnah on 95, our next Mishnah on 95 says if we have a Pesach that is being brought bitum'ah, as we mentioned before, that means that a majority of the Jewish nation are impure, and therefore we're going to allow the people who are impure to bring their sacrifice. The Gemara says here, the Mishnah says that if you were impure, you can't eat the sacrifice, but you can bring the sacrifice. Rabbi Eliezer says that you can even enter the sanctuary, meaning you can even enter the temple courtyard when the sacrifice is brought bitum'ah, with its impurity. The Gemara then asks, well, if it's being brought with impurity, meaning if someone is impure, they can come to the temple, the Gemara then asks, well, what about if a person who is impure decides to enter the actual sanctuary? Now, we know the sanctuary is only entered by the priests when they have specific duties in the sanctuary itself, in the Heichal. So the Gemara asks, if this impure person, this tameh met person, if he enters the Heichal, the sanctuary, what is the punishment? Maybe it's okay because, again, we are allowing people with impurity into the temple courtyard. Or we say, no, you were allowed into the temple courtyard. We're not allowing you into, it's not a free-for-all. You can't go wherever you want. The Gemara takes it a step further. What if this impure person eats part of the innards that are normally put onto the altar? Again, these are sacrificial parts of the animal that are generally burnt on the altar for God. What if this person who was tameh, who is impure, eats from this animal? Is that okay or not? Is it likened to the meat? And since we said he can eat the meat, he can also eat the emurim, the innards, the parts that are supposed to go on the altar? Or no, you were allowed to eat the meat, but you can't, again, take it too far. Daf 96 asks, well, what happened to the innards, the parts that were supposed to be burnt on the altar? What happened in Egypt? In the original Exodus, in the original Passover, what happened to these sacrificial parts that are supposed to be burnt on the altar? As we know, there is no altar in Egypt. And the Gemara explains at the top of 96 that there were actually 3 altars in the homes of the Jewish people in Egypt. What were the 3 altars? The 2 doorposts and the lintel, meaning every place that the Jews were told to put blood, right? The Jews put blood on the doorposts of the entrance of their house. The Gemara explains that this was the altar. As we know, the blood is placed on the altar in the temple. So too, the blood was placed on the doorway of every Jewish house, likening every house to the sanctuary, right? To the altar. So the doorway is the altar, and the people sitting inside are partaking in the sacrifice in the Corban Pesach. Now, since we are discussing, or since the Gemara brought up the Pesach that was celebrated originally in Egypt, the following Mishnah on 96 is going to discuss the difference between the original Pesach that happened in Egypt. That is this visualization. Again, these visualizations of the daf are from the website Daf HaChaim. And here he shows on the right column what's called Pesach Mitzrayim, the Pesach, the Passover in Egypt. And on the left, we have Pesach, what's called Lidorot, for generations. That is the subsequent Passovers after we left Egypt. So let's compare the two. So the Mishnah says, what is the difference between these two Passovers? Again, original, the one in Egypt, and for the generations. So the Mishnah says that in Egypt, they needed to take the animal, the sacrifice, on the 10th of Nisan, meaning 4 days before Passover. They took the animal, and then they needed to sprinkle the blood with the hyssop, with the ezov, the hyssop. They took the hyssop and they dipped it in the blood, and then they sprinkled the blood on the doorposts, and then it was eaten in haste on that night. As opposed to the Pesach for generations, where you can see here, there isn't a lot, right? All we see is that you are not allowed to eat chametz, leavened bread, for 7 days. So, and we see here that is only for 1 day in Egypt. So now let's try to understand these concepts. The animal was taken, the sacrifice was taken on the 10th of Nisan. They needed to do this in order to watch the animal to make sure it does not develop any blemishes. Interestingly enough, the Gemara says, hold on, we know that all korbanot, all sacrifices, need 4 days of what's called bikur, of watching and making sure that there are no blemishes. So it seems that in Egypt, it was more about guarding the animal. In general, afterwards, it was about making sure that the animal did not develop any blemishes. And then from here, the Gemara explains that though there aren't, as we can see here, there aren't many overlaps, there seem to be similar restrictions between the Pesach in Egypt and the Pesach for generations. What are those similarities? Both of them are eaten at night, right? At night, meaning on the 15th of Nisan. Both in Egypt, the sacrifice was eaten on that night. So too for the generations. An arel, someone who has not been circumcised, may not eat from either one of these sacrifices, meaning in Egypt originally or in the subsequent generations. But he can eat matzah and maror. So interestingly enough, someone who is uncircumcised may partake in some of the commandments of the day of or the night of Pesach, but specifically he cannot eat from the sacrifice itself. Again, somebody who is just a resident cannot eat from the sacrifice in Egypt or in the subsequent Passovers. And then the Gemara explains that a father or a master who hasn't given his son or his slave a brit milah, circumcision, he cannot eat from the Pesach. Again, similarly in Egypt or in the generations, in the subsequent Passovers. But he can eat from Truma. This has been back and forth in the Gemara. We see that they both have the prohibition of breaking the bones. Again, in Egypt and the subsequent Passovers. However, interestingly enough, in Egypt, as I mentioned in the Mishnah, the sacrifice was eaten in haste. B'chipazon, the Gemara says. And that was something, interestingly enough, that was unique to Egypt and is not done in subsequent Passovers, though, interestingly enough, there is a law that we're supposed to finish eating before chatzot, before midnight. Again, I say midnight in the halachic sense, not 12:00. So sometimes people are rushing towards the end of their Seder, but here the Gemara is really talking about eating the Corban Pesach in haste, whereas that was specifically in Egypt and not any time after that. Let's go to Pesach of Dorot, of the generations. We see that Pesach lasts 7 days, right? We know that we're not allowed to eat chametz, leavened bread, for 7 days. In Mitzrayim, it was only 1 day. Again, remember, the next morning they left Egypt, and now they're walking through the desert. It's not the same holiday that we are familiar with. Okay, from here we're going to go on to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah is going to be a little complicated because it discusses the concept of Temura. Temura is when a person tries to transfer the sanctity of one animal that was already sanctified as a sacrifice, as a korban, and you try to transfer the sanctity to another animal. Sometimes it could be, you're trying to do a good thing. Let's say you say, I set aside this animal to be a sacrifice, and then I find a better one. And I say, oh, I can't believe I made this animal. I want to make this other animal the sacrifice. Now, the Torah says that you are not allowed to do this. What does it mean? You cannot transfer one korban, one sacrifice, the sanctity of it to another. However, it does kind of work. What do I mean by that? You are able to transfer the sanctity, but it doesn't leave the original animal. So you wanted to now have one animal instead of the other. Instead, you end up with two animals that now have similar sanctity. That's fine if you are giving a voluntary sacrifice, right? If I decide I want to bring a sacrifice, I feel like I want to give a gift to God. Now I find another animal. I try to transfer the sanctity. It doesn't work. Okay, so now I bring two animals. But what happens if I do this with my Corban Pesach? With my Pesach sacrifice. And the Gemara is going to explain why I would do this. Primarily, the case is that you lost your original sacrifice. And let's read the Mishnah at the bottom of 96. Here we go, or the middle of 96. The Mishnah says that if you have this Temura, again, the Temura is the secondary animal. You now made both of those animals kadosh. You gave them sanctity. And the Mishnah says that a Temura of a Korban Pesach is brought on the altar and not brought. Now, that does not make sense. What do you mean brought and not brought? That's what we have to understand in the Gemara. So let's read the Gemara. Now, what is our case? Okay, our case is, sorry, we're still in the Mishnah. Our case is that you lost your Korban Pesach, right? I designated an animal. Now it got lost. What happens? I go and I get a new one, right? I figure I lost, animal A. I get animal B. Now, what happens when I find animal A, right? Now what do I do? Because now I have two Pesach offerings. Now we're going to try to construct a case of when, and that's going to be where the Gemara gets a little complicated. When did I find animal A, the original one? And we'll go through all the permutations. But basically, let's go to first our two options. Rabbi Akiva says that what do I do with animal A, the original animal? I set it out to pasture. I wait till it gets a blemish. Then I sell the animal. Again, till it has a blemish, it is, in theory, able to be brought on the altar. When it gets a blemish, now I cannot bring it on the altar. It loses some of its sanctity. Therefore, I can sell it. The money gets the sanctity of the animal. I take the money. I buy another Corban, another animal, and that animal is going to be brought as a shlamim. A shlamim is, at this point, a voluntary sacrifice that is very similar to the Corban Pesach. And therefore, I can kind of transfer this Corban Pesach into a shlamim. And Rabbi Akiva says that is only if I found the original animal before I sacrificed animal B, right? Again, I sanctify animal A, it gets lost. I sanctify animal B, now I find A, and then I do what I just mentioned, what Rabbi Akiva says, animal A becomes a shlamim, animal B is the Korban Pesach. I hope that was clear. If not, it's written here in front of you. Now, if it's found after you slaughtered animal B, then you can now take animal A, and it itself becomes a korban shlamim, meaning it itself can be brought on the altar. So just to remind us, the two options. One is I have to wait till the animal gets a blemish, sell it, buy a new animal, or I can take the original animal and bring it as a different sacrifice. So those are going to be our two options, and they're going to be different opinions based on when I found the original animal. Okay, so I hope everyone is still with me. And we'll go through again some of the permutations. As I mentioned, one option is I found it either before or after the slaughtering, the shchita. However, there is another opinion, which is I found it before or after chatzot. Again, to remind us, chatzot is the middle of the day. That is the time when I can already bring my sacrifice, my Korban Pesach. So the question is it based on the time that I can bring the animal as a sacrifice, or is it when I actually bring the animal as a sacrifice? And as I mentioned, there are different opinions based on, again, before or after I slaughtered the animal, or before or after midday. And those are all the opinions that we see on Daf 96. Okay, let's move on to Daf 97. Daf 97 mentions a concept of what's called chataot hametot. These are sacrifices that are korban chatat is in a sacrifice of atonement, right? If you transgressed inadvertently, you are able to bring a sacrifice of atonement. And this is a very unique sacrifice in that there are certain variables that need to exist for you to be able to bring this sacrifice. If any one of these variables is not around, or we'll see what those variables are in a minute, you cannot sacrifice this animal. What are these things? There are 5 cases where if one of these things happen, you have to actually kill the animal without bringing it, without sacrificing it, meaning it is not allowed to go on the altar. What are these 5 cases? The child of a female sacrifice. That child, the baby animal that is born, is kind of quasi-sanctified. It is not an atonement sacrifice. It is not a Corban Chatat. Therefore, it cannot go on the altar, and it needs to be killed. So that's the child of the sacrifice. The Temura, meaning if I switched it, if the owner died, if the animal got lost, and if it is over a year old, meaning it is no longer old enough, it is no longer the correct age. Any one of these things, says Shmuel, if it is meant to be killed as a Korban Chatat, if any of these things happen to a Korban Pesach, then it becomes a shlamim. So that's the top of this picture. Right, Shmuel says that if any of these things happen to a Pesach, it becomes a shlamim. Again, Rabbi Yochanan says, no. It's only brought as a shlamim if it was found after shchita, meaning after the original animal was slaughtered. But if it was before, then it goes out to pasture, as I mentioned before, as an option. And the Gemara says that this is not a rule across the board, that if the Korban Pesach becomes too old, it also is brought as a shlamim. And this rule is really only if it is lost and then found, meaning as we mentioned in our Mishnah on 96. And then the Gemara continues again, maybe it's not about the time, maybe it's not about if you slaughter the animal or not. Rather, as you see here at the bottom, Rabbi Yochanan talks about shchita. Shchita is the slaughtering, the actual slaughtering of the animal. Shmuel discusses, again, the time. The time, is it before or after chatzot? And that is what would be important. And as we see, Rabbi Yochanan goes by whether or not you slaughtered the animal, and Shmuel holds by the time and not by the action. Okay, our Mishnah we're now at the bottom of 97, going to 98. The Mishnah says that if you separate a female animal for your Korban Pesach, or a 2-year-old animal, again, these are animals that are not allowed to be brought as a Korban Pesach. They, again, are put out to pasture. We wait till they get a blemish and then sold to buy a Korban Shlamim, again, a voluntary sacrifice. Now, again, as if the owner died, then the son can bring it as a shlamim. So we learn 3 things from this Mishnah. One is that a live animal can be permanently disqualified. Generally, we say that a disqualification could only be after it is slaughtered. This Mishnah shows that even when the animal is alive, it can be disqualified. Then we have a very lengthy discussion about this child who the father who owned the Korban Pesach, the animal, if he dies. The question is, what happens to that sacrifice? So the Gemara says the Gemara says that if the son was registered with the father, then he can bring this animal as a Korban Pesach, right? So as long as he was registered, it's okay. If not, then it could be brought as a shlamim, again, as a voluntary sacrifice on the 16th. But then asks the Gemara, hold on, when did the man die, right? The original owner. If the man died before chatzot, right? This is the top of our picture here. If he dies before chatzot, again on the 14th, before he was able to bring the sacrifice, now the son is called an onen. We discussed this. He is a mourner. And remember we said that the onen, we're nervous, he's going to touch the body, become impure, and that is problematic. And he is not involved in the Corban, in the Corban Pesach. So how could he bring the Corban Pesach? Right? Maybe he's going to become impure. We say no. He dies after Chatzot, right? So if it's after Chatzot, then this animal was already fit to become a Korban Pesach, and then it becomes disqualified because the owner died. And then how could you make it a shlamim? So we say, no. Really, it's before Chatzot, and the son brings it. He doesn't bring it. We thought originally he brings it as a Pesach Rishon. We say, no. He can bring it as Pesach Sheni. Then we say, no. Another option, maybe it's after Chatzot, and the son was careful not to become impure, or maybe it was before Chatzot, and it becomes Shlamim. Or, I'm just going to keep going. There are a lot of options. You can see it all here. Maybe the father was what's called Goses. Goses means the father is on his deathbed. This concept in the Gemara means it's for sure obvious that the father is going to die any minute. Because of that, he was Goses, he was on his deathbed before Chatzot, and then the animal, right, we knew that he was going to die, or let's say maybe the live animal cannot be permanently disqualified, and therefore it becomes a shlamim, or again, or maybe he only designated it after Chatzot, meaning it was never a Korban Pesach while the father was alive, and he was only, that's option number 5 down here, he only sanctified the animal after Chatzot. I'm sorry if that got a little overwhelming and complicated, but it's going to be okay. All right, next Mishnah. The next Mishnah is what happens if your Korban Pesach got mixed up with 2 other sacrifices. Your Olah, again, the sacrifice that is going to be completely burnt on the altar, or your Asham, another sacrifice that is being brought. These animals are all similar, and therefore you're not sure which one is the Korban Pesach. What do? So you put all of them out to pasture. You wait till they all get a blemish. Then you sell all of them, and the highest value is the value that you need to now take to buy 3 new sacrifices, all in that value. Even if, says the Mishnah, even if you need to add out-of-pocket expenses, you need to make sure that every one of the sacrifices is of that greatest value, because you don't know which one was the one that was mixed up with the other. Okay, what if your Korban Pesach got mixed up with a Bechor? Bechor being the firstborn of your cattle or your livestock. What happens? Not cattle, of your sheep or goat. So again, it is brought like the Pesach offering, but it's eaten by a Kohen. Again, the Bechor, the firstborn that is brought as a sacrifice, is generally eaten by the priest. So let's say if this is a group of priests, no problem, they can eat it. If not, then it needs to be given to a priest to eat. Okay, the next Mishnah talks about, this one also gets a little complicated, so buckle up. What happens, again, we're talking about lost animals. So you have a group that lost its Korban Pesach. Now, let's say you have a group of, 10 people. You say to one of the people, you, Reuven, I need you to go out and go find our sheep. I can't find the sheep. I thought you were watching it. You thought I was watching it. You go out and go find our sheep. Okay, so you send Reuven out. And you tell him, if you find it, so then you'll shecht it and you'll slaughter it and keep us in mind. But then, they wait half an hour, they wait an hour, and he doesn't come back. So they say, you know what? We're also we'll take another animal, and we'll also slaughter an animal. Now, the question is, which one is the real Corban Pesach, right? So if he, again, Reuven, the one who they sent out, if he slaughtered his animal first, so then they all eat from his because he went first. They elected him to go out and find the animal, so then they should eat with him. If they, being the group, slaughtered their animal first, then they eat theirs and he eats his, because when Reuven went and slaughtered the animal, he had in mind that this was going to be his Korban Pesach. What happens if they don't know which one was first? Then he eats his, because again, he was sent out first, and they need to burn theirs because they don't know which one was first, but they don't have to bring a Corban Pesach Sheni. They don't have to bring another one. It's as if they were they fulfilled their obligation with his Korban Pesach. Okay, that was case number one. Case number two is going to be a little bit different. What if Reuven decides he's going to be responsible? He'll go out by himself, but the group did not elect him to go out and find the animal, right? So now he goes out and finds it, and then the group then goes and slaughters another animal. Now, and they have him in mind. Now what happens? They eat from their own, and if it's at the same time or they don't know, then his is the one that gets burnt, because again, they didn't designate him as a representative of the group, and therefore his sacrifice gets burnt. Okay, now that was number two. Number three, what if he told them to keep him in mind, and then they slaughtered on their own without keeping him in mind? Then again, if it happens at the same time, then you burn both of them, because they didn't have him in mind and he didn't have them in mind. So you burn both of those sacrifices. Okay. Sorry. He told them to keep them in mind, but they didn't. And now the last case is basically nobody told anybody. He did his own thing, they did their own thing, then nobody is responsible for the other one, and each one eats from their own, right? Reuven went out by himself, he eats his own sacrifice, they did their own sacrifice, they eat their own sacrifice. So those are our four permutations. I hope everybody's still with me. We are now on 99. 99, we now have two groups of we're not on 99 yet, but I have a picture for you. Okay, we now have two groups. Okay, that was all one group, two animals. Now we have two groups, two animals. If you weren't confused yet, you have another opportunity for confusion. Okay, two groups, two animals, and they get mixed up. What do we do? Not the people, the animals, right? They don't know whose Korban Pesach is whose. What do we do? So each group takes one person from the other group. This is a great picture you can see here. They swap one person. And now this is what they say, right? They say, if this animal is, right, if this sacrifice belongs to the other group, then I'm going to withdraw from that original group. I'll be with you. And now that person helps fulfill this group's obligation. And then they say, if the sacrifice, right? So again, if the sacrifice belongs to our group, then let's go with the group on the left. Everybody's in blue. This is the blue group. And there's one, I guess we'll call it gray. I don't know what color that is. Okay, so now they take this animal. They say, if this animal is our original blue group animal, so then this individual says, I'm no longer part of the gray group. I am now joining the blue group. And now we're all going to eat this animal, and it's all going to be great. Now we say, however, if this animal is the gray group's, then the whole group is going to withdraw, right? The blue people now say we're going to be with the gray person, and the gray person is that representative, and then this animal is the gray groups, and then it's okay. So now either way, this animal is part of the left group. and the other animal will be part of the right group. Again, each person says the same thing, meaning either I'm going to join you or you're going to join me. That's basically the bottom line. The same thing happens if there are 5 groups. Again, when there are 5 groups, there need to be 5 people in each group so that every group switches one person, and then they are able to do the same thing with each other, just in 5 groups instead of 2 groups. And the Gemara says at the top of 99, and this is very important for all of us, right? Silence is wise for smart people and all the more so for foolish people. Right? Meaning, if you talk too much, you're going to get yourself in trouble. So, right, that goes back to our original case with the 1 group and the 2 animals and everybody sending other people out. They got in trouble when they start sending people out. If you don't say anything, then everybody can eat from their own sacrifice. And therefore, the Gemara says it's better to keep quiet. Don't start to make things complicated. You're just going to get in trouble. And with that, we are going to finish the 9th chapter. And I hope all the confusion is going to be left behind us in chapter 9. With that, we are going to start chapter 10, our final chapter of Masechet Pesachim. And in this chapter, first of all, you should just know it's an incredible chapter. We're going to learn many fundamental concepts. We're going to learn about all the customs that apply in the time of the temple and in modern times. What does our Seder look like? What did the Seder look like in the time of the temple? What are all the, I would say, the root of all the customs that we do? So that is going to be, Be'ezrat Hashem, the next 3 weeks, we are going to be discussing the Seder night. So again, let's start with the Mishnah on 99 Amud Bet. And we're going to start with a discussion about Erev Pesach, right? Erev Pesach, it is now the 14th of Nisan. You may not eat from what's called samuch lemincha, meaning close to mincha time. And we're going to discuss what that means in a minute. Later on, we don't say this yet, but later on we are going to say mincha here means what's called mincha ktana, the small mincha, but it's basically 9.5 hours into basically from sunrise. Just to remind ourselves, a day in Jewish law is from sunrise to sunset. That time is divided by 12, and hour 9.5 is what's called mincha ktana. And therefore, our Mishnah says that you may not eat from close to this time and on. Again, we're going to see because we want to make sure that when you eat the matzah at the Seder, you are hungry, right? So if you have a big meal right before you light candles, that is going to be problematic because you are going to be hungry. I don't know. You could be hungry even if you do eat a big meal beforehand, but the Mishnah says you should stop eating at a certain point. Number 2, the Mishnah says that a poor person needs to recline at the Seder. We'll talk more about reclining in next week. And the poor person must drink 4 cups of wine, even if the poor person is being fed based on charity or from a soup kitchen. They need to make sure that this person has enough for his Seder. Okay, the Gemara asks, why is the Mishnah discussing Erev Pesach? Why are we discussing Erev Pesach? Why? Because this issue is also an issue on Erev Shabbat. On Friday afternoon, Rabbi Yehuda says that you can't eat from Mincha and on. Again, this idea that when we go into Shabbat, we should be hungry, and therefore at a certain point on Friday, you should stop eating. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can eat for as long as you want. till candlelighting. So Rav Huna says our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yossi, meaning on Friday night he says you can eat till candlelighting, but on Pesach he says you need to stop early because I want to make sure that you're hungry for the matzah. Rav Papa says no, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, because he says there's a difference between from mincha, which is 9.5 hours, and close to mincha, which is 9 hours. Meaning Rabbi Yehuda is going to ask you to stop eating half an hour earlier on Pesach, on Erev Pesach, than when compared to Friday afternoon to Erev Shabbat. Okay. Therefore, at the top of 100, the Mishnah says, we say that the Mishnah is like Rav Huna and like Rabbi Yossi, meaning that, and the Gemara says that the law follows Rabbi Yehuda on Erev Pesach, meaning on the day before Pesach. Ilana, we're going to get to that point in 2 minutes exactly. We're going to talk about Purim in a minute, but first we're still in Pesach. So the Gemara says that the law follows Rabbi Yehuda on Pesach and Rabbi Yossi on Friday, meaning on Fridays you're allowed to eat till candlelighting, but for Pesach you need to stop early. This implies that there is an argument. The Gemara says no, the argument is about stopping to eat and not about starting to eat. So let's discuss that. Rabbi Yehuda says you need to stop eating. What do I mean stop eating? Let's say I started a meal at 2, 3 in the afternoon. Now it's all of a sudden time to light candles. Do I need to stop my meal or not? Rabbi Yehuda says as soon as it's nightfall, you need to stop. You need to say Birkat HaMazon, the grace after the meal. Then you need to, you clear the table. Then you are going to light the candles, say the prayers, have a new meal, make kiddush, have a new meal. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can continue eating as long as you want. And then when you finish eating, you say the grace after the meal, Birkat HaMazon, and then you're going to say kiddush all the way at the end. And then there's a great story where these two rabbis who have been arguing, plus Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, are eating together. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel asks, he asks Rabbi Yossi, maybe we should stop to be nice to Rabbi Yehuda. And he says a great line, are you trying to conquer, right, to acquire the queen while I'm still in the palace? And this is a beautiful reference to the Megillah, to Esther and Achashverosh. This is the line that Achashverosh says to Haman, and it was just beautiful because we learned it literally the day after Purim. So I love when that happens. So it's a Purim reference in our Pesach Masechet. But basically they say, no, we're not going to stop. We're going to continue eating to show the students that this is the law. The law is you can continue eating till as long as you want. Interestingly enough, and this is what Ilana just brought up, Shmuel says the law is not like Rabbi Yehuda that you have to stop, and not like Rabbi Yossi that you get to do as whatever you want, like you can go as long as you want. Rather, you need to take a break. It's called pores mapa. You cover the table, you take a break from your meal, you make kiddush, you sanctify the day, and then you continue. And as Ilana mentioned, this is exactly what some people did this year. We actually did it in our home. For Purim, because our Purim Suda was on Friday afternoon, and you could go into Shabbat. So it's exactly what we did. We started our Purim Suda at 3 in the afternoon, and at 5:12, well, really at 5 o'clock, we stopped. We actually cleared the table. We reset the table for Shabbat. We lit the Shabbat candles. We davened, we said the prayers of Kabbalat Shabbat, and we literally started a new meal. Again, we did not make a new Borei Pri Agafen, a new blessing on the wine, or a new blessing on the bread, because we had already did it. We were still in the middle of our meal. So we took a break, and then it was Shabbat, and we kind of started our meal again. And at the very end, we said Birkat Hamazon for the entire meal. So we basically went from 3 in the afternoon till 9 o'clock at night. It was really an incredible experience, but exactly because of this, the concept of pores mapa, and that was something that we learned from this Gemara on Daf 100. And there are a few stories of the same idea, that when you cover the table, you take a break, and then you continue. Okay, at the bottom of 100, we get into the idea of making kiddush, of sanctifying the day. Here again, it could be Friday night. It could be on Pesach. There's no real difference. But the Gemara talks about making kiddush in shul. And we actually, growing up, our shul had this custom that at the end of the Friday night prayers, the chazan, the cantor, would make the blessing on the wine. And the question is, who is he making it for? So that's what we're going to learn now. So the Gemara says at the bottom of 100 that if you make kiddush in shul, Rav says that you need to make another blessing on the wine when you get home, but you fulfilled your obligation of sanctifying the day, of kiddush. Because we're going to see on the next stop, Rav does not connect kiddush and the meal. They do not have to be in the same place. Shmuel says, no, not only do you need to make another blessing on the wine, you also have to make another kiddush, because he holds that it is intrinsically linked to the meal. Now we're on Daf 101. Again, according to Rav, you need to make kiddush again for the people at home. And according to Shmuel, you need to make kiddush in the shul for the people who are actually going to be eating in the shul. And the truth is that growing up, our shul did sometimes have meals in the synagogue, and they would, again, the kiddush that was made in the synagogue was for those people who were eating in the synagogue. Okay, let's continue. Okay, Shmuel says that you need to eat something when you make kiddush. Again, he says that it is linked, and therefore maybe that's only when you're going from house to house, right? What we would call shinui makom. I'm changing my location. But maybe if you change rooms, then that would not be considered a change in location, because you're in the same house, you're just changing rooms. Or, right, maybe no, even if you're in the same house, you need to make kiddush again, because your kiddush needs to be exactly where you're going to have your meal. And therefore, if it isn't, you need to do it again. So the Gemara says that Rabbah also holds like this, and asks, right, but really he usually holds like Rav. Why is he holding like Shmuel? And the Gemara says that really he holds like Rav when he's being stringent, but here it's a leniency, and therefore he's going to hold like Shmuel. Okay, we now have a third opinion. A third opinion is Rabbi Yochanan, and he says, not only did you fulfill your obligation of kiddush, you even fulfilled your obligation on the wine, meaning you don't have to make another blessing on the wine, even when you're going to a new place. So he says, whether it's a new place or a new wine, you don't have to make a new blessing. And he says, or maybe you need to make a new blessing on a change in place, but not on a there's a Braita that says you need to make a new blessing only when you change places. So again, we want to try to understand what is change of place. It's a different house, it's not a different room. And what happens, right? Only if you're eating. So now we get into the concept of what are you eating? right? If you're eating something that doesn't need a blessing afterwards, a bracha achrona, in the same place, which is basically if you're eating something like you're drinking water or you're eating an apple or an orange, these are fruits or foods that you say either shahakol or you say borei pri ha'etz. That's the blessing that you make. The bracha achrona, the blessing afterwards, is what's called borei nefashot. That does not have to be said exactly in the place where you ate it. And therefore, the Gemara says, if you're eating one of those foods, then you need a new blessing in the new place because you have no intention of going back to the original place. However, if you were eating something that you made a mizonot, right, meaning something made out of the 5 grains, pasta, bread, pasta or cake, or if you made hamotzi, meaning you had bread, that you have to go back to the original place to make the bracha achrona, right? If you're going to be making an ala michya or birkat hamazon, you actually have to return to the place that you ate your food originally. And then if you're eating that, then you don't have to make a new blessing in the new place because we know that you're going back to the original place. So it's a little counterintuitive, but it does kind of make sense in terms of have in mind that you're coming back or not. Or the Gemara says it doesn't matter what you're eating. Either way, if you change places, you need to make a new blessing. What happens if you get up from the table? Let's say the Gemara gives the example of you see a bride and a groom and you run to greet them. Do you need to make a new blessing when you come back? So the Gemara says, well, if you left someone at the table, and here it says if somebody was sick or old, but it doesn't necessarily have to be someone sick or old. The idea is as long as someone stayed at the table, it's as if you didn't really leave, the meal still continued, and then you don't have to make a new blessing. But if everybody left, then it's as if you ended the meal, and then you need to start again. And I think with this, we are going to end this week's shiur. We will pick it up at Daf 102 next week. And I want to wish everybody a Shavua Tov. It should be a great week. And enjoy the following week. The dapim, the topics are going to be really great. We're going to be learning a lot about making different blessings, about what do we do when we start the Seder, and we're really going to go through every step of the Seder in the next 3 weeks. So I look forward to our continued learning, and see you next week, everyone.